Ohayou gozaimasu. And as it is the cold season, there is a little bit of the white stuff outside even as I speak. And as we are all, no doubt, glued to and riveted by the current Winter Olympics, and I'm currently doing some work on Shinoda Masahiro, I thought this would be a good opportunity to cast a brief quizzical critical eye over this director's official documentary about the Winter Olympics that took place in Japan in 1972, the Sapporo Winter Olympics in the snowy climes of Japan's northernmost island, Hokkaido. A film that is in some ways typical of its form, in some ways breaks interesting different ground. And although perhaps this is of most interest to either ardent Olympics buffs or Shinoda completists, I think there is enough here to repay a close viewing and to interest those who have any kind of interest, not just in sport, but in what sport can mean, what it can represent. With this in mind, I have to begin this review by suggesting that the form of, in particular, Ichikawa Kon's 1964 record of the Tokyo Olympics, Tokyo Olympiad, often regarded as one of the greatest sports films ever, if not the greatest, is a film that casts quite a large shadow over Shinoda's film. Structurally and in the way tone is developed and the way that the director views different events and the sportsmen and women involved suggests that Shinoda was influenced by Ichikawa. These are two films that, if you put them side by side, seem in some instances to be following a very sort of rigid blueprint, I think. Now, as you may well be aware, the blueprint that I speak of is one that, to a certain extent, extends beyond Ichikawa Kon's aforementioned Tokyo Olympiad. Every Olympic Games, summer and winter, since the birth of the modern Olympic Games in 1896, when the Games were held in Athens, has had its own documentary record, its own film that in some ways sets the scene for that particular Olympics and obviously acts as some kind of official document of what transpires throughout the Games. Very few of these have ever received any sort of widespread acclaim or even attention, really, beyond Tokyo Olympiad and the celebrated German director Leni Riefenstahl's record of the 1936 Berlin Olympics, which has been marred slightly. This was obviously during the rise of Nazism and has often been criticised for buying into both aesthetically and ideologically the Nazi project. Beyond this, very few of these films have received anything other than the sort of official interest of people, I guess, who are concerned with what actually happened, who took part, who won what games were played, and so on and so forth. And as I said, there is something of a kind of accepted structure, but this is one that, for good or for ill, Ichikawa Kon sort of played a little bit fast and loose with. I say for good or for ill because it was a film that did his artistic standing no harm, but was viewed highly critically by the people who had put Ichikawa in charge. He was a late replacement for none other than Kurosawa Akira. But the Olympics committee in particular were displeased with what Ichikawa did with his film. I think the way that he, as I said, played fast and loose with things like official documentary record. So the fact that Shinoda Masahiro would index his record of the 1972 Winter Olympics, 8 years after Tokyo Olympiad, is a notable decision. It's a notable step. And as I said, if you watch these films side by side, you will see that the way that Shinoda introduces the games, the way that he sets up the specific setting, in this case, as I've said, Sapporo in Hokkaido, the way that he talks about the recent history of the games, the way that he follows the athletes arriving, the progression of the Olympic flame, the opening ceremony, and then even the attention that he gives, which is not even amongst the events of the games, the ones that he gives most attention to, bears a very strong resemblance to Ichikawa's film. I think what is telling in this sense of influence between Ichikawa's Tokyo Olympiad and Shinoda's Sapporo Winter Olympics is the sense that what is significant about Tokyo Olympiad, what we see from the very beginning in shots of literally the cityscape of the Japanese capital changing, of bulldozers and wrecking balls at work, smashing up buildings and giving way to new, very modern architecture in their stead. This is very much a portrait of a time and place. The Tokyo Olympics being in Tokyo at this time was a very symbolic event. It marked a sort of culminating point in not only Japan's emerging economic miracle. This was also the first year that the bullet train appeared, but also its international acceptance, the fact that it was welcomed back onto the international stage after the perceived transgressions of the 1930s and 1940s, culminating obviously in the Pacific War. And Ichikawa very deftly sort of adumbrates this sense of what the games meant for Tokyo and for Japan. So Shinoda, in the way that he, to a large extent, mirrors Ichikawa's structure, also by this sort of intertextual sense of contrast, similarly underlines the extent to which his film is a portrait of a time and a place. And for him, as a new wave director, as someone who was often given to exploring more sort of working class, blue collar, proletarian visions than had his masters, people like Oza in particular. There's a lot of time, or comparatively a lot of time, given over to things like fishing in Sapporo, in the surrounding environs. There are shots of other people going about their daily lives in the towns, and in particularly in Sapporo. And from this, we get a sense of the games embedded, not necessarily in a new or different Japan, but in a Japan that we in the world at large don't often see. So we get a sense of what this means for a local audience, perhaps an indigenous audience, as opposed to a national audience. So instead of the sense of everyone coming together, all Japanese coming together to celebrate a triumphant moment in its post-war development for the country, here we actually get something like the opposite. So a juxtaposition occurs between the two films. We get what the games mean for a local audience, for people who perhaps would feel in some ways removed from, even disenfranchised by Japan's economic capitalist development. People who have perhaps been left on the margins of this capitalism. And although Shinoda goes no further than merely alluding to this, I think it would be unreasonable, unrealistic to expect that he would really seriously explore sort of working class dispossession in an official Olympics film. Nonetheless, I think this is a significant facet of this picture, and one that gives it real weight and depth. Another sense of a juxtaposition emerges in that Shinoda, that is, includes two narrating voices. Throughout Tokyo Olympiad, there is a male narrator who talks about the rules and regulations of the various events, delves into the sort of biographies of various outstanding athletes, etc., etc. Here we also get a male narrator who fulfills the same function, but alongside and contrasted with this is a female narrator who intones much more poetically about what we're seeing. This narrating voice talks about, for instance, the fact that in the biathlon and the shooting, this develops from people hunting deer. So sort of hunting as a way of life. There is a very strong scene, a kind of montage of shots taken in and around Sapporo, where something like a song is intoned by this narrator about everyone watching the Olympics and what it actually means for a specific audience watching this Olympics. So there is a fracturing of narrating voices. We get facts on the one hand and, if you like, poetry on the other. I think Sapporo Winter Olympics structurally is quite finely attuned to and calibrated to represent the different facets of sportsmanship, endeavour and achievement that is always on show throughout the Olympics, and to juxtapose different rhythms, forms, skills, etc. to maximum effect. So Shinoda cuts abruptly, as Ichikawa does at times in Tokyo Olympiad, between, for instance, stasis and movement. So we go from the sort of protracted march or marches of the opening ceremony straight into the headlong rush of the skiing, the downhill slaloming and skiing that offers a sort of almost literally breakneck pace. We go in, for instance, the biathlon, from the movement of the Olympians through the snow to the very focused, very concentrated stasis of the shooting part of this particular event. We also get high seriousness and drama in, for instance, the ice hockey and speed skating, the latter of which has a very strong Japanese contingent, to the almost comical, the way, for instance, that Shinoda includes a montage of accidents and falls during several events, most particularly the figure skating. And we also get a sort of rapid fire treatment of some events and a protracted, very detailed treatment of others. Again, like Tokyo Olympiad, this latter comes down to the cross-country skiing, which through the use of different cameras, lenses, and slow motion, Shinoda goes to great pains to depict the absolute sort of physical challenges of this event and the almost complete sort of collapse of some of the competitors. This is something that comes towards the end of Shinoda's film as the extended marathon comes towards the end of Tokyo Olympiad. I think it's definitely worth stressing, vis-a-vis this film's relationship to Tokyo Olympiad and to Ichikawa, that Shinoda is less grandiose and sort of humanist and philosophical than Ichikawa. Those of you who've seen the film Visions of Eight, where 8 directors present their own take on the Olympics, in this case the tragic Olympics of Munich in 1973, sort of just after the Sapporo Winter Olympics, will know that Ichikawa, who in that film presents a segment on the 100 meters race, the men's 100 meters, is quite desirous of using the Olympics as a kind of jumping off point for some kind of wider inquiry into far more sort of, as it were, weighty themes pertaining to human endeavor, but also to philosophical questions of peace, of war, of social change and development, and just to considering how humans sort of in extreme situations act and what this actually reflects, both in a literal and perhaps a metaphorical sense. Visions of Eight is a very eclectic mix, ranging from the philosophical, the dramatic, to the comical. And Shinoda doesn't really have any particular sort of point of view or skin in this game in looking at the Winter Olympics. So it's a far more sort of human eye view, or even gutter eye view of what the Olympics means, and he deigns to see it in far more sort of practical terms, to see the work involved, to see the practical sort of effort, if you like, that goes into staging an event such as this. One should also mention as well here, for those of you who are familiar with Werner Herzog's film, his 1972 effort, The Great Ecstasy of the Woodcutter or the Woodcarver Steiner. Herzog's film, typically for this director, this luminary, this maverick, is not really interested in the Olympics or even the particular event that it focuses on. Indeed, it's ostensibly about ski jumping. It's a portrait of the man of the title, who is a sculptor, Walter Steiner. But he is someone who's almost too good to be called a ski jumper, and both he and Herzog instead term what he does ski flying. It's a typically sort of Herzogian inquiry into dreaming, into pushing the envelope of humanity, thinking around and beyond all confines. Walter Steiner took part in the Sapporo Winter Olympics. We see him in Shinoda's film, and Herzog's film picks up later that year and into the following year as Steiner trains and takes part in other ski jumping or ski flying events, and it chronicles his struggles in trying to sort of rein in world record jumps that are not recognized as such for various reasons. And this tension between ski jumping and ski flying is key throughout here. There's some incredible slow motion footage that, a bit like Ichikawa may recognize more than Shinoda, sort of allows us or facilitates us to see beyond a mere sporting event, and to really ponder what we're seeing in much grander terms than sport or even exceptional sport. And this again clashes a little bit with what Shinoda is doing. This actually would have made an interesting addition to Visions of 8. It's more like something like Arthur Penn's exploration of pole vaulting in that film. But it's interesting that we have this connection with the ski jumper Walter Steiner, and it's, as I said, an interesting portrait of the tension between different conceptions of a single sport. Although Herzog is very good in this film also of the practical details of how Steiner can push the limits of his efforts, and some of the very real practical costs thereof. I think as much as a copy of Tokyo Olympiad, then Shinoda's documentary here hews itself close to its forebear in order to stress those key differences. There are other similarities, just like Ichikawa. Shinoda at times invests great dramatic weight in the athletes and the events that he focuses on. At other times, he treats them comically. There is a very diverse soundtrack here. At other times, he treats them quizzically. But this just serves to point up those key differences. And I think more than Ichikawa, Shinoda is interested in the behind-the-scenes putting on of the Olympics. There's no extended focus on this, but moments that show things like journalists at work, workers checking the ice before the speed skating, other people sort of working behind the scenes to put up the flags during the slaloming for the skiing events, bespeaks a real sense of the simple sort of labour that has to buttress what is otherwise a kind of, ostensibly at least, a celebration of exceptionality. Also unsurprising for a new wave director is the fact that Shinoda focuses on representation. So I've mentioned things like the song, but there are also frequent cutaways to people reporting on the Olympics, to people filming the Olympics. He even has a slight detour wherein a Japanese figure skater himself becomes a cameraman. He films a rival in order to study his form. And Shinoda sort of slyly alludes here to notions of spectatorship and representation. He also has moments that are ambiguous in terms of what he wishes to infer. There's a moment with a celebrated figure skater, a young US figure skater, and there's an extended lap dissolve during her performance in which we see local birds, something that had been filmed at the beginning to cement a sense of place, contrasted with this figure skater. And there's as I said, an extended lap dissolve that has this figure skater and the birds on screen at the same time, suggesting perhaps a kind of natural grace and artistry on the one hand, but also perhaps suggestive of the fact that the figure skater is working in a more confined and more sort of strictly regimented environment, and the sort of natural freedom of the birds, if you like, is something that she ultimately cannot really aspire to. So I think for all these reasons, this is a more than worthwhile documentary. Certainly if you are interested in the Olympics and if you know Ichikawa's Tokyo Olympiad, then this is definitely a film to watch. If you're interested in Shinoda, it goes without saying that this is one to watch. But at a time when, with the current Winter Olympics, we are seeing an increasing plethora of cases relating to cheating in various ways, and in which we have some events that are perhaps for specialists and a very select niche audience only. I think the bubbly, jazzy, dramatic focus that Shinoda develops throughout this long documentary, like Tokyo Olympiad, it is not far shy of 3 hours long, really does work to be able to address itself to and grab the attention of a more or less layman viewer. So if you get the chance, do give it a watch. Follow me on X at AdamBingham01, on my website culturaljapan.com, which will be inclusive of much work on Shinoda in the very near future. Thank you very much for watching. Give me a like and a subscribe, or don't, and I'll see you next time.